The stars outside the small window looked different when you were about to change history. Ambassador Lisa Carter pressed her face against the cold glass of the human ship, Earth's voice, and watched the massive space station grow larger as they approached. After 20 years of talking to aliens, she had learned to read their body language, their voices, and their lies. Today would be no different. "Ambassador, we'll be docking in 10 minutes, said Jake Morrison from behind her. He was young, maybe 25, and still believed that being right would make aliens listen to them. Lisa had believed that once too. "Thank you, Jake." She turned away from the window and looked at the thick folder on her desk. Inside were reports about everything humans had done to help the galaxy in the past 50 years. Medical cures that saved millions of alien lives. Peace talks that stopped wars before they started. Food programs that ended famines on distant worlds. Technology shared freely when other species would have sold it for profit. None of it had mattered before. The Galactic Council had rejected humanity's request to join them 15 times in 50 years. Sometimes they said humans weren't smart enough. Sometimes they said humans were too emotional. Sometimes they just ignored the requests completely. But Lisa had to try one more time. Earth's leaders had spent 5 years preparing this presentation. They had gathered proof of every good thing humans had done. They had testimonies from alien species that humans had helped. They had economic reports showing how much money human trade brought to the galaxy. The docking bay of the council station was enormous. Ships from 47 different alien species sat in neat rows like a museum of space travel. The human ship looked small and simple next to the others, but Lisa knew it was built better than most of them. Humans might not have the fanciest technology, but they made things that worked and lasted. Stay close and don't speak unless they ask you a direct question, Lisa told Jake as they walked through the corridors. The station was beautiful in a cold way. Everything was made of crystal and metal that reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes. It was built to impress, not to comfort. The council chamber was the size of a sports stadium. Rows of seats, curved up toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. Each section was designed for a different alien species. The Zephyrians sat in the largest section because they had the most votes. They were 9 feet tall with blue skin and heads that looked stretched upward. They thought they were the smartest beings in the galaxy. The HFY sat together in their own section, looking like giant insects with multiple eyes that never seemed to blink. They made decisions as a group mind, which meant they all thought exactly the same thoughts at the same time. Individual opinions didn't exist for them. The Lumarians didn't sit at all. They were beings made of pure energy who floated in special containers that kept them from flying apart. When they spoke, their voices sounded like music, but their words were often cold and cutting. Lisa walked to the center of the chamber where a small platform waited for speakers. She had stood here twice before, and both times she had left with nothing but polite rejections and barely hidden insults. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I am Ambassador Lisa Carter, representing the human species and the planet Earth. We come before you today to request, once again, membership in this council." She opened her folder and began reading from the reports. In the past 10 years, human medical researchers have developed cures for the Andorian plague that killed 6 million beings across 12 worlds. Our doctors worked without payment and shared all research freely with affected populations. The Zephyrian representative, High Minister Zalfara, looked bored. She was checking something on a glowing tablet and barely glanced up when Lisa spoke. "Human peacekeepers have successfully mediated 17 territorial disputes in the Outer Rim territories," Lisa continued. "Our negotiators prevented wars that could have cost billions of lives and destroyed entire star systems." Chancellor Vexok of the HFY was cleaning his compound eyes with special tools. He seemed more interested in his personal hygiene than in anything Lisa was saying. Human traders have established supply routes that connect distant systems and provide essential resources to colonies that would otherwise face starvation or economic collapse, Lisa read. Her voice remained steady, but Jake could see her hands beginning to shake slightly. The Lumarian delegate, who called itself Bright Path Through Darkness, was having a quiet conversation with another energy being in musical tones that the translation system couldn't pick up. Lisa closed the folder and looked around the chamber. Humanity asks only for the chance to contribute to this council's work. We have proven our commitment to peace, our willingness to help others without expecting payment, and our ability to solve problems that others cannot solve. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Chancellor Vexhak looked up from his eye-cleaning tools and spoke without any emotion in his voice. The bipedal mammals from the third planet of the Sol system remain uninteresting to this council. Your species shows primitive emotional responses that make you unsuitable for the sophisticated work of galactic governance. High Minister Zelthara finally looked up from her tablet. Perhaps when your species evolves beyond their basic instincts and develops actual useful capabilities, we might reconsider. Your emotional thinking leads to inefficient decision-making and unpredictable results. Lisa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice calm. Honored Minister, those emotional responses have led us to save millions of lives and prevent countless wars. Our emotional thinking helps us understand what other species need and want, which makes us better negotiators and peacekeepers. Bright Path Through Darkness spoke in its musical voice. Your contributions are noted in our records, but they are insufficient for council membership. This body has more important matters to discuss than the feelings and needs of individual beings. Another Zephyrian delegate laughed, a sound like wind through metal pipes. The humans and their need for approval. Like children who bring their parents' drawings and expect praise. Perhaps they should focus on growing up before asking. To sit at the adult table, added a Vex High representative. The insults continued for several minutes. Lisa stood perfectly still and listened to beings she had spent years helping mock everything about her species. They called humans primitive, emotional, childish, and useless. They laughed about human attempts to make friends with other species. They joked about how humans always wanted to help others instead of focusing on profit and power. Finally, Chancellor Vexhak raised one of his 4 arms for silence. This session is concluded. The human request for membership is denied and will be filed under indefinite review. We have real business to conduct. Lisa nodded politely. Thank you for your time, honored Chancellor. May the Council find wisdom in its decisions. She turned and walked out of the chamber with Jake following behind her. They said nothing until they were back on their ship and the docking bay doors had closed behind them. I'm sorry, Ambassador, Jake said quietly. I know how hard you worked on that presentation. Lisa sat down at her desk and pulled out a secure communication device. Jake, send a message to Colonial Command on Earth. Use encryption level 7. What should the message say? Lisa looked out the window at the massive council station, with its crystal spires and glowing lights that showed off how advanced and important it was. Inside that station, 47 alien species were making decisions that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. They had power, technology, and influence that stretched across thousands of star systems. But they didn't have wisdom. They didn't have compassion. They didn't have the ability to see past their own pride and prejudice to recognize value in others. Tell them to implement Protocol 7, Lisa said. The Council has made their position clear. It's time for humanity to make ours clear as well. Jake's fingers hesitated over the communication keys. Protocol 7 was something that had been discussed in secret meetings on Earth, but he had hoped it would never be used. It meant giving up 50 years of trying to join galactic civilization. It meant turning away from everything humanity had worked toward. But as he looked at Lisa's face, He understood. Humanity had spent half a century begging for acceptance from beings who saw them as nothing more than useful pets. They had shared their knowledge, risked their lives, and given their resources to help species that couldn't even be bothered to listen when humans spoke. Maybe it was time to stop begging. Jake sent the message. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Lisa Carter sent her message to Earth. Captain Steve Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the transport ship New Horizons and watched his crew pack up the last of the human research, stationed on Kepler 442b. The work was quiet and careful. No one was rushing, no one was angry, and no one was making speeches about how unfair everything was. They were just leaving. "Captain, the last of the medical supplies are loaded," reported Lieutenant Amy Collins. She was young but efficient, and she understood that this job was more important than it looked. "Dr. Park says she needs 10 more minutes to finish the data transfer." Steve nodded and looked out at the planet below. Kepler 442b wasn't much to look at. Brown dirt, gray rocks, and a thin atmosphere that needed machines to make it breathable. But the human scientists had turned it into something special. They had built laboratories that could create new medicines and medical devices that other species couldn't make anywhere else. The aliens had always been happy to buy what the humans made here. They paid good money and asked lots of questions about how the medicines worked. But they never said thank you, and they certainly never invited humans to join their fancy council. Dr. Helen Park was in the main laboratory, standing in front of a computer screen that showed years of research. She had been working on Kepler 442b for 8 years, and her team had created medicines that saved lives on 40 different worlds. The quantum biological healing technology they had developed could repair damaged organs and cure diseases that had killed millions of aliens. "Dr. Park, are you really going to delete all of this?" asked Dr. Tony Mitchell. He had worked with Helen for 6 years, and he couldn't believe they were throwing away research that could help so many people. Helen's finger hovered over the delete button. The screen showed hundreds of files with names like Zephyrian Nerve Disorder Treatment, and Vex High Immunity Boost Formula, and Lumarian Energy Stabilization Protocol. Each file represented months or years of work, and each one could save thousands of lives. "Tony, we offered to share all of this for free," Helen said quietly. "We sent copies to every major medical center in the galaxy. We published papers in their scientific journals. We even sent teams of doctors to teach there. Medical students. And what did they say about us?" Tony remembered the recordings from the council session. The aliens had called humans primitive and emotional. They had laughed at human attempts to help others. They had treated humanity like children who didn't understand how the real world worked. "They said we were too emotional to be useful," Tony answered. "That's right. They said our emotions made us weak and stupid. Well, let's see how useful their pure logic is without our emotional responses guiding the research." Helen pressed the delete button. The screen went blank. 8 years of boom. Medical research vanished in seconds. Research that could have saved millions of lives was gone forever. Helen felt a pain in her chest, but she knew it was the right thing to do. The aliens wanted logical, unemotional beings to solve their problems. Now they could try to solve them without human help. "Pack up the equipment," Helen told her team. "Take everything that belongs to us. Leave the building, but take every machine, every tool, and every sample we brought here." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were happening on dozens of worlds. Human colonies, research stations, trading posts, and diplomatic missions were shutting down operations. The work was so quiet that most aliens didn't notice it happening. On the farming world of Ceres Nova, Rick Thompson was overseeing the harvest of the last crop his team would grow for alien markets. The planet had perfect soil for growing earth plants, and the combination of human farming knowledge and alien growing conditions had created food that was both delicious and nutritious for 17 different species. Rick's operation fed 3 entire star systems. His grain prevented famines. His vegetables provided nutrition that aliens couldn't get from their own foods. And his fruits were considered delicacies that sold for high prices on rich worlds. The demand was so high that Rick could have expanded his operation 10 times over and still not met all the orders. "Mr. Thompson, what should I tell the Betazoid colonies?" asked Mary Lopez, his assistant manager. "They have a standing order for 2 million tons of grain, and their next shipment is supposed to leave tomorrow." Rick looked out over his fields. Golden grain stretched to the horizon, ready for harvest. In the distance, huge machines worked steadily to gather the crops. Everything was perfect for another record harvest that would feed millions of hungry aliens. "Send them one more shipment," Rick said. "After that, they'll need to figure out how to grow their own food." Mary looked confused. "But sir, they don't know how to grow food like this. Their planets don't have the right soil, and their people don't have the knowledge. They'll starve without our grain." "That's not our problem anymore, Mary," we offered to teach them how to farm. We offered to share our seeds and our knowledge. They said we were too primitive to understand real agriculture. Now they can show us how advanced beings handle food production. Rick turned away from the fields and walked toward the loading docks, where the last shipment was being prepared. He had spent 15 years building this operation, and it had been the most successful farming project in galactic history. But success didn't matter if one respected the people who made it possible. The most important withdrawal was happening in the neutral zone, where human peacekeepers had been keeping 2 powerful alien nations from destroying each other for 30 years. The Krill Empire and the Democratic Worlds Alliance hated each other with a passion that went back centuries. They had been fighting over territory, resources, and old insults for so long that most people had forgotten what started the wars. Commander Patricia White had been in charge of the peacekeeping force for 10 years. Her job was to watch both sides, prevent sneak attacks, and negotiate solutions when problems arose. It was dangerous work that required understanding both alien cultures and being tough enough to make them listen. The Krill were warriors who respected strength and honor. They were 8 feet tall with thick armor-like skin and faces that looked like angry lizards. They believed that might made right and that the strongest should rule over the weaker. The alliance was made up of several different species who believed in democracy and individual rights. They were smaller and weaker than the Krill, but they were smart and worked together well. They used technology and strategy to make up for their lack of physical strength. Both sides had been planning their next moves around the assumption that human peacekeepers would continue to monitor the border and prevent major attacks. They had grown used to having humans around to keep them from doing anything too stupid. Commander White sat in her office on Peacekeeping Station Alpha and recorded her final message to both sides. She had spent months planning what to say, and she wanted to get it exactly right. "This is Commander Patricia White of the Human Peacekeeping Force. As of 0800 hours tomorrow, all human personnel will be withdrawing from the neutral zone. Our mandate expires with our departure. We wish both sides well in their future endeavors." The message was polite and professional, but everyone who heard it understood what it really meant. For 30 years, humans had been the only thing standing between the Krill and the Alliance. Without human peacekeepers to watch them, both sides were free to do whatever they wanted to each other. General Krill Tech of the Empire received the message while planning a surprise attack on 3 Alliance border worlds. The attack was supposed to be small and quick, designed to capture territory without triggering a major war. He had been counting on human peacekeepers to prevent the Alliance from responding too strongly. Admiral Chenadol of the Alliance was reviewing intelligence reports about Krill military movements when the message arrived. Her plan was to use the intelligence to launch preemptive strikes against Krill supply bases. She had assumed that human peacekeepers would prevent the Krill from escalating to full-scale war in response. Both military leaders realized that their careful plans were now useless. Without humans to control the situation, any attack could lead to total war. But they had never learned how to make peace without human help. As the last human ships departed from various systems, they left behind empty stations, abandoned facilities, and a galaxy that was about to discover what it had lost. The humans didn't make angry speeches or demand apologies. They didn't threaten revenge or promise to return when the aliens learned their lesson. They just left. On Earth, Colonial Command was receiving reports from every human settlement in the galaxy. The withdrawal was proceeding exactly as planned. All human personnel were safe. All equipment and resources were being recovered. And all operations were shutting down on schedule. Director Robert Clark read through the reports with mixed feelings. Part of him was proud that humanity could execute such a complex operation so smoothly. Part of him was sad that it had come to this. And part of him was curious to see what would happen next. "Sir, we're receiving communication requests from several alien governments," reported Communications Officer Linda Foster. "The Andorian Medical Council wants to know why our doctors are leaving. The Zerian Mining Consortium is asking about the status of our engineering contracts." 3 months after the humans left, the problem started small. Mine Director Gexpol of the HFY stood in the control room of Zerian 7 and stared at the production reports. The numbers were bad and getting worse every day. "Explain this to me again," Gexpol said to his chief engineer. His compound eyes reflected the red warning lights that flashed across the control boards. "How did our production drop by 60% in 3 months?" Chief Engineer Hythen clicked his mandibles nervously. The humans provided detailed safety protocols when they ran the engineering operations. We thought these were suggestions, based on their primitive emotional concerns about individual worker welfare. And now, it appears they were actually critical operational requirements. Without following their protocols, we have had 7 major accidents, 12 workers dead, millions in equipment destroyed, and 3 mine shafts completely collapsed. Gexpol felt his hive mind connection buzz with angry thoughts from the other Vexhai on the planet. The Vexhai didn't understand individual emotions, but they understood failure. And this was a massive failure. The humans warned us about these. Safety issues? Yes, Director. They said the mining operations needed regular maintenance schedules, worker rotation protocols, and stress monitoring systems. We thought these were inefficient measures, designed to make workers comfortable rather than productive. Gexpol looked at the latest accident report. A support beam had failed because it hadn't been inspected in 6 months. The human protocols would have caught the problem weeks before it became dangerous. 17 workers had been trapped underground for 2 days before rescue teams could reach them. How long will it take to restore full production? Unknown, Director. The humans took all their knowledge with them. We are trying to reverse engineer their methods, but they had 30 years of experience that we cannot replace quickly. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic sector of the galaxy, wars were breaking out everywhere. The territorial dispute between the Zephyrian colonies and the hegemony of Tal had exploded into open warfare. For 15 years, human mediators had successfully managed this conflict by understanding what both sides really wanted and finding compromises that satisfied everyone. Without human peacekeepers, both sides had decided to settle their differences with weapons. Chancellor Vexhawk received urgent reports from his intelligence division. The news was worse than anyone had expected. "How many conflicts are we monitoring now?" he asked his aide. 18 active military engagements, 7 trade wars, and 12 territorial disputes that are escalating toward violence, the aide reported. This represents a 600% increase in galactic conflict since the humans withdrew. "I thought we only had 3 conflicts when the humans were here." "Correct, Chancellor. It appears the humans were preventing conflicts that we were not aware of. They were solving problems before they became wars. Chancellor Vexak felt a sensation he was not familiar with. It took him several minutes to realize it was worry. The Vex-High hive mind was designed for efficient decision-making, not for dealing with uncertainty and fear. How were they doing this? Intelligence suggests they were monitoring communication patterns, trade disputes, resource allocation issues, and cultural tensions across hundreds of systems. When they detected potential conflicts, they would quietly intervene with economic incentives, diplomatic pressure, or direct mediation. The Chancellor stared at the intelligence report. Page after page described human peacekeeping operations that the Galactic Council had never known about. Humans hadn't just been assigned to official peacekeeping duties. They had been actively working to prevent wars before they started. Why didn't we know about this? The humans never reported these activities to the Council. They simply handled the problems and moved on to the next crisis. In the economic sector, Trade Minister Korval of the Zephyrian Republic was discovering that the galactic economy was much more fragile than anyone had realized. The quarterly reports showed supply chain disruptions affecting everything from food to technology to raw materials. Explain to me how the absence of one species can cause this much economic chaos. Korval demanded of his economic advisor, Minister. The humans didn't just participate in our economy. They were the connecting tissue that held it together. They established trade routes that linked systems in ways that seemed simple but were actually quite sophisticated. The advisor brought up a holographic display showing trade routes across the galaxy. When the display showed the routes as they existed 3 months ago, it looked like a complex spider web connecting hundreds of systems. When it showed current trade routes, huge gaps appeared where human-managed connections had been. The humans understood the needs and capabilities of different species in ways that we never appreciated, the advisor continued. They knew that the Andorians produced excellent metals, but needed grain from human farms. They knew that the Betazoids had surplus energy, but lacked medical supplies. They connected producers with consumers across species barriers that we couldn't cross ourselves. Korval studied the display. Without human trade connections, some systems were drowning in surplus goods they couldn't sell, while others faced shortages of essential supplies. Can we rebuild these connections? We are trying, Minister. But the humans had an unusual ability to understand what different species needed and wanted. They seemed to read our emotions and motivations in ways that helped them predict market demands. Their emotional thinking that we mocked. Yes, Minister. It appears that their emotional understanding was actually a sophisticated form of economic analysis. The worst crisis was developing in the medical sector. Dr. Hivemind Collective 7, the Zephyrian Republic's chief medical officer, was dealing with a nightmare scenario. The Andorian plague, which humans had successfully contained and treated for 10 years, was spreading again. How is this possible? The doctor asked her research team. We have all the human medical equipment. We have copies of their treatment protocols. Why is the plague spreading faster than ever? Her lead researcher pulled up the medical data. Doctor, we simplified the human treatment methods to focus on pure biological efficiency. We removed the components that seemed emotionally driven rather than medically necessary, such as the humans included psychological counseling, family support systems, community involvement programs, and social rehabilitation protocols. We determined these were inefficient additions to the core medical treatment. Dr. Collective 7 reviewed the human medical files with growing alarm. The human approach to treating the plague had been incredibly complex, involving not just medicine but psychology, sociology, and community support systems. And without these components, the plague has adapted. It appears that the psychological and social factors were not just helpful for patient recovery. They were essential for preventing the disease from mutating and spreading. The doctor felt something she had never experienced before, panic. The Zephyrian medical system was designed for logical, efficient treatment of biological problems. They had no experience with the kind of holistic approach that humans used. How many cases do we have now? 47 million confirmed infections across 11 star systems. The death rate is 3 times higher than when the humans were treating. At the Galactic Council Station, High Minister Zelthara was reviewing reports that painted a picture of civilizational decline. The Council's efficiency ratings were plummeting. Response times to crises had doubled. The cost of maintaining galactic stability had increased by 40% in just 3 months. Perhaps we underestimated the humans, she admitted to her advisory council. It was the first time in her career that she had acknowledged being wrong. About anything. Minister, would you like to review the human contribution files? Asked her chief advisor. Zelthara had never bothered to read the detailed reports about human activities in the galaxy. She had assumed they were minor contributions that didn't warrant her attention. Now she spent hours reading through documents. That painted a very different picture. Humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been maintaining it in ways that no one had fully understood. They had been the immune system that prevented conflicts, the nervous system that connected different parts of the economy, and the heart that kept everything working together. How did we miss this? She asked. Minister, the humans never demanded credit for their work. They solved problems quietly and moved on to the next crisis. We became accustomed to having them handle the difficult issues that other species couldn't solve. Zelthara felt a cold sensation in her chest that she eventually recognized as regret. The humans had been doing the work that no one else wanted to do, and they had been doing it better than anyone else could, and the council had rewarded them with insults and rejection. Can we contact them? We have been trying, Minister. All diplomatic channels are closed. Their automated response says they are focusing on internal development and are not accepting communications. As the 3rd month of crisis ended, emergency sessions were being called across the galaxy. The Vex High Collective was experiencing unprecedented chaos as their hive mind struggled to process too many simultaneous crises. 6 months after humanity left, the galaxy was falling apart. Fleet Admiral Krillinash stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the casualty reports from the war between his empire and the Democratic Worlds Alliance. The numbers were so large that they didn't seem real anymore. 3 billion dead, 12 star systems turned into graveyards, entire planets burned to ash and rock. The war that had started as a small territorial dispute had become something that threatened to destroy both civilizations completely. Admiral, the Alliance has deployed planet-killer weapons against this Aryan system, reported his tactical officer. They're threatening to destroy any world that supports our war effort. Krillinash's scaled face showed no emotion, but inside, he felt something that Krill warriors were not supposed to feel: fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but fear of meaningless destruction that served no purpose. And our response? High Command has authorized the use of biological weapons against Alliance civilian populations. The death toll estimates are in the hundreds of millions. The Admiral stared at the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets. Red symbols marked destroyed ships, dead worlds, and refugee populations fleeing the combat zones. It looked like a map of civilizational suicide. Sir, do you remember what the human peacekeepers used to say? Asked his communications officer, a young Krill named Tor Ask. Krill and Nash turned to look at the younger warrior. What did they say? They said that victory without survival is meaningless. They kept us fighting each other instead of destroying each other. The Admiral thought about the human commander Patricia White, who had spent 10 years mediating disputes between the Empire and the Alliance. She had been firm but fair, tough enough to make both sides listen, but wise enough to find solutions. That preserved everyone's honor. The humans had understood something that the Krill military leadership was only now beginning to grasp. There was a difference between winning a war and surviving one. Send a message to the Alliance, the Admiral ordered. Request a ceasefire meeting in the neutral system of Kepler 190. Sir, High Command will not approve a ceasefire when we are winning. We are not winning, Krillinash said quietly. We are dying. Both sides are dying. And when we are all dead, there will be no one left to remember what we were fighting about. Meanwhile, at the Grand Exchange, the galaxy's primary trading hub, Economic Coordinator Prime Zalthek was watching the collapse of interstellar commerce. The massive station that had once processed millions of transactions per day was now operating at barely 20% capacity. How bad is it today? Zalthek asked his assistant as he walked through the trading floors that used to be crowded with merchants from across the galaxy. The Betazoid colonies are reporting food shortages that will become famine within weeks. The Xerian mining worlds have surplus metals, but no way to transport them to markets. The Andorian medical centers need medicines that are available on Tau Ceti, but they cannot establish trade connections. Zalthek stopped walking and looked at the nearly empty trading floor. A few desperate merchants were trying to negotiate deals, but without the human trade coordinators who had connected different species and understood their needs, most transactions were failing. What about the automated trading systems? They work fine for simple exchanges between species that understand each other. But 70% of galactic trade involved complex negotiations between species with different values, different needs, and different ways of communicating. The humans were the translators who made those deals possible. The coordinator felt his confidence crumbling. The Zephyrian economic system was based on logical efficiency and mathematical precision. It had never occurred to him that successful trade required understanding emotions, cultural values, and unspoken needs. The humans weren't just moving goods, his assistant continued. They were reading the minds and hearts of different species to figure out what they really wanted and needed. Our computers can calculate prices and shipping costs, but they cannot understand why the Andorians value medical supplies more than profit, or why the Betazoids will pay extra for food that reminds them of their homeworld. At the Galactic Medical Center on Nexus Prime, the plague crisis had become a catastrophe. Dr. Collective 7 stood in the Emergency Command Center, surrounded by monitors showing infection rates, death tolls, and treatment failures across 14 star systems. Doctor, the infection rate has increased by another 12%, reported her assistant. We now have over 100 million confirmed cases. Dr. Collective 7 stared at the numbers and felt something she had never experienced before: helplessness. The Zephyrian medical system was the most advanced in the galaxy, with technology that could perform miracles. But technology alone wasn't enough to stop this plague. Have we been able to recreate the human treatment protocols? We have the equipment and the medications, but we cannot replicate their approach to patient care. The humans treated not just the disease, but the person who had the disease. They considered family relationships, community support, psychological state, and social environment as part of the medical treatment. The doctor pulled up files from the abandoned human medical station on Kepler 442b. The complexity of the human approach was overwhelming. For every medical intervention, there were psychological assessments, family counseling sessions, community outreach programs, and social rehabilitation plans. This is not medicine, she said. This is something else. The humans called it holistic care. They said you cannot heal a body without healing the mind and spirit as well. Dr. Collective 7 felt her logical worldview cracking. Everything she had learned about medicine focused on biological processes, chemical reactions, and technological interventions. The idea that emotions and relationships could affect physical healing seemed primitive and unscientific. But the evidence was undeniable. The human approach had worked, and her approach was failing Dot in the most disturbing development. The galaxy's rate of innovation and discovery had slowed dramatically. Chief Science Officer Mindtap of the Lumarian Collective was reviewing research reports from across the galaxy, and the decline was shocking. How can this be possible? Mindtap asked his research team. We have all the same equipment, all the same data, all the same computational power. Why has scientific progress nearly stopped? His lead researcher, a being of pure energy named Flow of Light Through Crystal, pulsed with confused patterns. We have analyzed this phenomenon extensively. The humans contributed something to the research process that we cannot quantify or replicate. What kind of contribution? They called it creativity, intuition, and innovative thinking. They would make what they called leaps of logic that led to breakthrough discoveries. Our analysis suggests that 67% of major scientific advances in the past century began with human insights. Mindtap felt his energy form fluctuate with confusion. The Lumarian Collective prided itself on perfect logical analysis and computational precision. The idea that a logical thinking could lead to better results was deeply disturbing. Show me. An example. Flow of Light Through Crystal displayed a research project from 2 years ago. The development of quantum biological healing technology. The breakthrough came when a human researcher named Dr. Helen Park noticed that quantum particles seemed to respond to biological emotional states. This observation was scientifically impossible and logically absurd, but correct? Yes, her illogical observation led to technology that revolutionized medicine across the galaxy. We would never have made that connection because we would have dismissed emotional responses as irrelevant to quantum physics. As the crisis deepened, some alien civilizations began to fragment under the pressure. The Zephyrian Republic faced rebellions in 17 outer colonies as local populations. It declared independence rather than wait for the central government to solve supply shortages and economic problems. The HFY Collective was experiencing something that had never happened in their species' history: the breakdown of hive mind unity. With too many crises happening simultaneously, different parts of the collective began developing separate responses, creating chaos and confusion. High Minister Zelthara, who had once been humanity's harshest critic, now spent her days reviewing human diplomatic files. The documents revealed a level of sophistication that she had completely missed. Humans hadn't just been solving problems, they had been preventing problems from occurring in the first place. They anticipated consequences we never considered. She told her Emergency Advisory Council, when we focused on immediate efficiency, they considered long-term stability. When we addressed symptoms, they treated causes. The Council had attempted to reach out to humanity through various intermediaries, but every approach was politely refused. Humanity wasn't responding with anger or demands for apologies. They simply weren't responding at all. What are the humans doing now? Chancellor Vexhawk asked during an emergency council session. Intelligence Director Vexmal presented his latest reports. They appear to be thriving. Their colonies are expanding rapidly. Their technology is advancing faster than ever, and their society shows no signs of the chaos affecting the rest of the galaxy. How is this possible? 1 year after humanity left the galaxy, Chancellor Vexhawk stood before the Galactic Council and prepared to say words that no council leader had ever spoken before. The great chamber that had once been filled with pride and arrogance was now nearly empty. Many species had withdrawn from the council to deal with their own crises. Others had simply collapsed entirely. Members of the council, Vexhawk began, his voice carrying across the mostly vacant seats. We face the end of our civilization. In 12 months, we have seen the death of over 1 billion beings, the collapse of interstellar trade, the failure of our medical systems, and the breakdown of peace across hundreds of worlds. The few remaining delegates listened in silence. High Minister Zelthara sat in her section with only half her usual staff. Many Zephyrian colonies had declared independence and were no longer sending representatives. The Vex High Collective had fractured into 17 separate hive minds that could barely communicate with each other. The cause of our collapse is clear, the Chancellor continued. We rejected the one species that was holding our civilization together. We called them primitive when they were actually essential. We mocked their emotions when those emotions were the key to understanding and solving complex problems. Chancellor Vexak paused and looked around the chamber. A year ago, this room had been filled with delegates who believed they were the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Now the survivors looked like refugees from their own arrogance. I move that the Galactic Council formally request the return of human participation in galactic affairs, not as junior members seeking our approval, but as essential partners whose help we desperately need. The motion passed unanimously. It was the first unanimous vote in the Council's history, and it was a vote of surrender. The message to Earth was written and rewritten dozens of times. Every word was chosen carefully, because everyone understood that this might be the last chance to save what remained of Galactic Civilization. Ambassador Kefter of the Lumarian Collective was chosen to deliver the message because her species had a reputation for wisdom and honesty. But even she struggled to find the right words for what amounted to a complete admission of failure. To the human colonial government and the people of Earth, the message began. The Galactic Council formally acknowledges that our previous assessment of humanity was catastrophically wrong. We now understand that humanity's contributions to galactic civilization were not merely helpful, but essential to our survival and prosperity. The message went on to detail the disasters that had followed humanity's departure, the wars, the famines, the plagues, the economic collapse, and the breakdown of everything that had made the galaxy a place where different species could live and work together. We humbly request that humanity consider returning to galactic affairs, not as petitioners seeking membership, but as essential partners whose participation we desperately need. We offer full council membership with voting rights, along with formal recognition of humanity's crucial role in maintaining galactic stability. The message was broadcast to every human colony and settlement. Then the galaxy waited for an answer. The response came not from the human colonial government, but from Ambassador Lisa Carter, the same woman who had been dismissed so rudely 18 months earlier. Her face appeared on screens across the galaxy, and she looked exactly the same as before, calm, professional, and dignified. To the members of the Galactic Council, she began. Humanity has received your message and appreciates your recognition of our contributions. We understand the difficult circumstances that led to your request, and we sympathize with the suffering of innocent beings across the galaxy. Chancellor Vexik felt hope rising in his chest. The humans were going to help. They were going to save the galaxy from the consequences of its own stupidity. However, Ambassador Carter continued, we must respectfully decline your invitation to return to galactic affairs at this time. The hope died instantly. Across the galaxy, the leaders who had been counting on human forgiveness felt their last chance slipping away. Over the past year, humanity has learned important lessons about our place in the universe, Ambassador Carter said. We discovered that we do not need the galaxy as much as we believed. Our colonies are thriving, our research is advancing rapidly, and our people are prosperous and happy. She paused, and her expression became slightly warmer, though still professional. We have also learned that our emotional responses and what you called primitive thinking are actually sources of strength, creativity, and wisdom. The empathy that you criticized as weakness has taught us to understand the needs of others. The intuition that you dismissed as illogical has led us to solutions that pure logic could never find. Director Robert Clark sat in his office on Earth and watched the broadcast with mixed feelings. Part of him wanted to help the aliens who were suffering. The human instinct to assist others in need was as strong as ever. But another part of him knew that some lessons could only be learned through experience. We wish you well in your efforts to restore stability and prosperity to your worlds, Ambassador Carter continued. We hope you will find sustainable solutions to your current challenges. Should you succeed in creating a truly cooperative galactic community based on mutual respect and appreciation for diverse contributions, we would be happy to reconsider diplomatic relations. The message included something that surprised everyone: a data package containing detailed information about treating the Andorian plague, protocols for managing interspecies conflicts, and economic models for sustainable trade relationships. We are not abandoning the galaxy out of anger or spite, Ambassador Carter explained. We are providing the tools and knowledge you need to solve your problems yourselves. Humanity has always believed that the best help is the kind that teaches others to help themselves. The broadcast ended with a simple statement that carried enormous weight. Until you can build a civilization that values wisdom as much as intelligence and heart as much as logic, humanity will continue to focus on our own development and the welfare of our people. The reaction across the galaxy was mixed. Some species were angry that humanity had refused to save them. Others were grateful for the knowledge and tools that humans had provided. A few were thoughtful enough to understand the lesson humanity was trying to teach. High Minister Zelfara spent the next several months studying the human-provided protocols and trying to implement them in Zephyrian society. It was difficult work that required her people to learn concepts like empathy, intuition, and holistic thinking. But slowly, the results began to show. The Andorian plague was brought under control using human medical approaches that combined biological treatment with psychological and social support. Trade relationships were rebuilt using human models that considered the emotional and cultural needs of different species. Conflicts were resolved using human negotiation techniques that focused on understanding motivations rather than just positions. It took 5 years, but the galaxy slowly began to recover. The Galactic Council was reformed with new principles that emphasized cooperation over dominance and contribution over conformity. Species that had once competed for status now worked together to solve common problems. The Krill Empire and the Coal Empire Democratic Worlds Alliance signed a lasting peace treaty based on human peacekeeping principles. The economic system was restructured to include the kind of emotional intelligence and cultural understanding that humans had provided. Medical systems began incorporating holistic approaches that treated patients as complete beings rather than just collections of symptoms. But humanity remained outside the Reformed Council. They had built their own confederation of worlds where emotional intelligence, creative thinking, and individual dignity were valued alongside technological advancement. When alien species applied to join the Human Confederation, they were evaluated based on their character and contributions rather than their power or technology. Ambassador Carter, now older but still serving as humanity's primary diplomat, occasionally met with representatives from the Reformed Galactic Council. The meetings were cordial and productive, but humanity maintained its independence. Why won't you rejoin us? Chancellor Vexak, during one such meeting. His species had learned humility the hard way, and he genuinely wanted to understand. Because you still think of it as rejoining, Ambassador Carter replied with a gentle smile. You've learned to value what we contributed, but you haven't yet learned to value what others contribute. When you can build a true community of equals where every species is appreciated for their unique gifts, then we can talk about partnership. The galaxy had learned its lesson, but it was still learning to apply it. Young aliens now studied in human schools to learn about concepts like empathy, creativity, and moral reasoning. Human philosophy, psychology, and ethics became required. Subjects in alien universities. A new generation was growing up that understood something their parents had missed. That true advancement comes not from dismissing others as primitive, but from recognizing that every species, every culture, And every individual has something valuable to contribute to the great community of life. The final message of the story was simple but profound. In a galaxy full of advanced minds,